Jim Jones transformed the People's Temple from mid-20th century revival roots into a powerful, charismatic congregation that promised racial equality and socialist uplift. Born in 1931, Jones moved the church from Indianapolis to California in the 1960s and eventually anchored it in San Francisco, where the temple combined social programs, political activism, and aggressive recruitment. His fiery rhetoric and hands-on relief work drew hundreds of followers and earned patronage from local politicians and city officials, turning spiritual authority into political influence. Promising a multiracial utopia and protection from America's racial tensions, Jones began moving followers in the mid-1970s to a remote site in northwest Guyana, establishing the People's Temple Agricultural Project, better known as Jonestown, on the Matthews Ridge Road deep in the jungle. By 1978, roughly 1,000 people, including families and children as well as trusted lieutenants, lived under his control in that isolated settlement. Reports from defectors and a group called Concerned Relatives, backed by letters and tapes, alleged intimidation, forced labor, beatings, and constant surveillance inside Jonestown and demanded outside scrutiny. Those mounting complaints prompted U.S. authorities and Representative Leo Ryan to organize a fact-finding trip to Jonestown in November 1978, setting the stage for a confrontation that would end in a catastrophic bloody finale. When Congressman Leo Ryan arrived in Jonestown on November 17, 1978, he brought a small delegation of journalists, concerned relatives of People's Temple members, and aides like staffer Jackie Spear to test the utopian image Jim Jones had sold for years. The compound staged cheer children in neat rows, canned speeches about equality, communal meals clashed with hushed, terrified whispers, accounts of forced labor, beatings, food shortages, and relentless surveillance. Jones acted the genial host, smiling for photographs, while lieutenants such as Tim Carter and Larry Layton circulated like sentries, enforcing obedience with glances and curt corrections to keep the performance intact. Small acts of desperation punctured the spectacle. Residents furtively approached Ryan and the journalists, asking to leave, slipping notes, and showing bruises and raw stories of punishment for dissent. Some visitors insisted Jonestown was salvation and praised Jones's leadership. Others broke down describing children denied adequate medical care and adults coerced into work under threat. Those split testimonies hardened into a razor edge. The delegation could not ignore credible allegations backed by tape recordings and letters sent to U.S. relatives and officials. Secret escape attempts increased the danger. Temple members who sought asylum were escorted under tense watch in vehicles toward the Port Kaituma airstrip, and the jungle air thrummed with nervous energy. Subscribe. It's totally voluntary. Jones's public charm and private menace tightened into a vice, the contrast sharpening with every whispered plea and every filmed smile. By the morning of November 18, 1978, more than a dozen residents had expressed a desire to leave, and the simmering confrontation was already tipping toward a violent, decisive breach. On the morning of November 18, 1978, a chaotic departure attempt at the Port Kaituma airstrip turned deadly. Congressman Leo Ryan, accompanied by aides and journalists, was trying to escort more than a dozen defectors from Jonestown onto small planes while Temple lieutenants watched every movement. Tension was electric. Moments later, Temple member Larry Layton produced a handgun and opened fire on the tarmac, unleashing an ambush that left Ryan mortally wounded and several others dead, including NBC reporter Don Harris, with more people injured. The scene was horrific. Bodies slumped beside muddy runways, survivors screamed, and the aircraft that might have carried them away became smoldering wrecks. News of the shooting ricocheted back into the compound within hours. Jim Jones seized that news like a preacher stoking an apocalypse, turning the Port Kaituma attack into proof of an imagined conspiracy against the people as Temple. Tape recordings and survivor testimony show Jones intensifying apocalyptic rhetoric, presenting revolutionary suicide as a noble, defiant act rather than a desperate surrender. He ordered lieutenants to mobilize, Armed sentries were posted, gates and perimeters were secured, and ritualized white night rehearsals, previously staged drills, morphed into real preparation. Temple officers compiled lists, gathered children and elders, and moved supplies that would be used that night. Jones framed the choice as absolute, casting outside intervention as annihilation and insisting that death on their terms would preserve dignity. The compound shifted from tense despair to grim, mechanical coordination, every motion accelerating toward a final, monstrous decision. On the afternoon of November 18, 1978, Jim Jones used the shootings at the Port Kaituma airstrip as the pretext for a coordinated, homicidal finale inside Jonestown. He called his lieutenants together, announced a planned, final act, and framed it as revolutionary suicide to resist imagined enemies. Under Jones's barking orders, armed sentries sealed the gates, patrols corralled families, and a small, practiced apparatus shifted from rehearsal into execution. Containers of a sweetened drink were brought forward. Recorded evidence and later forensic tests showed cyanide mixed with sedatives and tranquilizers was administered to many victims. Parents were ordered to give cups to their own children while guards watched. Eyewitnesses who later escaped into the jungle and reached Port Kaituma and Georgetown described frantic scenes. Caregivers forced infants to drink. Nurses and lieutenants used hypodermic syringes on those who resisted, and staffers moved from hut to hut with buckets and lists. The so-called Jonestown death tape captures Jones and others alternating between exhortation, chant-like repetition, and cold, business-like commands, with the brittle sound of screams and collapsing bodies in the background. Confusion and coercion blended with meticulous logistics name lists, assigned roles for lieutenants, and preposition supplies, so the killing had the outward sheen of organization even as it dissolved into horror. A handful of residents slipped past sentries and fled into the steaming Guyanese jungle. They later reached authorities and testified. When officials reached the site, 918 people lay dead in and around the compound. Autopsies and toxicology reports detected cyanide and other drugs in many bodies, and Jim Jones himself was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head. What had been promised as a utopia ended in a calculated, grim collapse. A mass killing and collective suicide executed with chilling determination. When U.S. Embassy officials, Guyanese military personnel, and investigators forced their way into Jonestown on November 18th and 19th, 1978, they found a grotesque, almost clinical ruin. 918 dead bodies spread through communal buildings, huts, and along muddy paths. Many were children, their small forms collapsed beside adult relatives. The scene was both ghastly and methodical rows of corpses. Autopsies later detecting cyanide and sedative residues, hypodermic syringes, and empty cups stained with a sweet berry drink commonly reported as Flavor Aid, scattered like sinister props. Jim Jones was found dead from a gunshot wound near a pavilion. Evidence and survivor testimony later pointed to a calculated mix of coerced ingestion, injections, and orchestrated compliance. News that Congressman Leo Ryan had been assassinated at the Port Kaituma airstrip hours earlier crystallized what had happened. This was not an isolated horror, but a coordinated collapse combining elements of mass murder and mass suicide. The killings at the airstrip and the bodies in the jungle turned the tragedy into a national emergency and a moral reckoning, forcing investigators, politicians, and the public to confront the full brutality of Jonestown and the lethal reach of charismatic fanaticism. After the ghastly discovery of 918 bodies on November 18, 1978, U.S. and Guyanese investigators and coroners assembled forensic evidence. Traces of cyanide and sedatives were reported. Autopsies were completed, and the so-called death tape turned Jonestown from rumor into an indisputable crime scene. Surviving Temple members faced intense legal scrutiny. Most notably, Larry Layton was convicted for his role in the Port Kaituma killings. Families and survivors endured decades of traumatic grief, legal battles over repatriated remains, and persistent psychological scars that resurface in testimony. The massacre prompted changes. Law enforcement, mental health professionals, and advocates refined protocols for monitoring closed charismatic groups, handling mass casualty scenes, and responding to defectors. Jonestown became a grim cultural touchstone and a bloody warning about isolation, unchecked authority, and the cost of silence. How do societies spot and stop the next charismatic slaughter?